In times of trauma and adversity, we must create space for connection by sharing a story of hope. Welcome to Stories of Hope Worldwide, hosted by Kerry Atherton. This podcast shares inspiring stories of individuals who have faced significant challenges and emerged stronger, offering hope and resilience to listeners all over the world. Join Kerry, the founder of Stories of Hope, every week to hear these remarkable journeys and find strength to overcome your adversity. Now, let's listen in to this week's conversation.
Welcome to another episode of Stories of Hope Worldwide. I'm Kerry Atherton and I'm your host. And today's guest is a special one. It's my podcast producer, Matthew Bliss. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Kerry. Thanks for having me. It's going to be weird as well, listening to myself introduce myself to the editor later. That will be me.
But I love having you on because I just love your voice.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
going to be great chatting. And I mean, that's why I chose you for my voiceovers also. But Matt, you're bringing a lot of hope to people like me who have a desire to do a podcast and feel like it's not going to be possible. And so that's a wonderful spot to be in. You are bringing a lot of hope to a lot of people and helping people bring hope to others. And I mean, I'm talking about the word hope because my podcast is Stories of Hope. But today the tables will be turning as well because I know that you've got a few questions for me also. Let's launch straight in. So why podcasting? What got you into this field?
Well, for me, as with many others, it was a pandemic dalliance. It was I've listened to podcasts for a while. And then the pandemic and remote lockdowns came around and all of a sudden everyone was at home with a webcam and a microphone. So figured might as well give that a go. And I had a crack at a couple of podcasts. Some of them, the four mates in a room talking about things they like, which, as always, isn't usually the most successful podcast in the world. And then I had a crack at one for myself to continue what was otherwise my teaching training because I'd finished a secondary teaching degree and didn't get a teaching job, but wanted to continue my own, I guess, professional education in that sense.
Yeah.
So I ran a podcast for a little while called the Teaching Culture Cast that interviewed teachers that I knew with the adequate amount of anonymity. And I really enjoyed doing that. It just became a bit too much after a while, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. What I found invariably after doing my own podcasts for a while and touting my ability to edit podcasts in my work is that I found a number of people who also wanted to make podcasts. And so I helped them out a little bit. Then come mid-2023, I moved from Australia, where I lived at the time, worked in a government job. My wife being Irish, we knew we wanted to move to Ireland at some point, having been in Australia for 10 years. So we moved to Ireland in 2023. And I brought some of those side hustle podcasters who I edited for with me. And that was great to keep things going until I found a full-time job, which I invariably never did. And so I took that as a bit of a sign to lean into the podcast editing as a job for a while. So for the last couple of years, the time of recording, beginning of 2026, I have been editing and producing and constantly improving the kinds of podcasts that I edit for clients directly. And I work for myself. I don't work through a company doing that. It's all done by me, which is its own, entrepreneurial journey. I don't want to pretend that any kind of burnout or whatever I've suffered hasn't been talked about on the show already, because I know it has. But in terms of the podcasting stuff, it's a growth industry at the moment. It's been growing despite what people will tell you. Like, oh, YouTube's coming. YouTube's going to kill it. Oh, everyone's got a podcast. Why would you? It's so busy. There's no way for people to find you. All of that invariably falls on deaf ears to the people who really do want to create a great podcast for what they do. And when they don't necessarily have the time to edit or learn the stuff themselves, they can approach someone like me. So I feel like there's a lot of room to grow in the space.
Oh, that's great. And what is the difference, do you think, for somebody who does create a great podcast and somebody who just creates an average podcast?
I'm going to start the answer to this one with a bit of a caveat. People who do research about podcasting will hear this a lot, but your first podcast may not be your best one. Now, what that means isn't that you don't sound good or you don't have the right equipment or your idea is terrible. It just means that the podcasting stuff is hard. Not everyone has a predisposition to essentially talking to an audience they can't see, they know can't react to them. And sometimes someone will do a podcast where they're not even talking to someone like we are right now. It might just be themselves. There are so many differences between the person who can speak to a room of 20 people to a room of 2,000 people to talking by themselves. There are some podcasters who aren't as comfortable in the podcast chair as they are in doing other things in front of huge groups of people. So your first podcast will not necessarily be good. But what I believe will set a good podcast apart from other things is to not get too locked up in the administrative side.
Yeah.
The administrative being, how long should the episodes be? Or what's my ideal content length? Or how do I create a great hook? Or what should I automate? And what can AI create for me? All of these questions are you asking for a shortcut for a thing you just haven't done yet. So the key is, I think, to create that great podcast is to think about a great idea, set some goals for yourself that are achievable and sustainable. And really, you just have to bend like a reed as you go through it. As much as the podcast gurus out there will sell you a course for $200 and tell you in all certainty that everything will be okay if you follow just these steps.
Yeah.
You kind of
times I've heard those ads.
Right?
Yeah.
The truth is that you have to find your own groove with it. You have to be open to being flexible, receiving information from what you see, the podcast analytics, downloads, listeners, YouTube views, whatever it might be, and making sure that you've got an open mind to both change, but also knowing exactly what you're trying to do with the podcast to get it going and make it good, but also make it enjoyable for yourself.
Yeah, so really having that goal in mind before you set out.
Yeah, and that's, that's a gargantuan task anyway. Like, who's this guy talking on a podcast I'm going to listen to for 45 minutes to an hour, saying that I've got the right stuff, but that I also need to plan for things that I've never done before? How do I do that? And this is the other bit of common podcast parlance is you just have to go out and try. In some ways, you kind of just do.
Yeah.
But going back to the actual question, again, we talked about it before the recording. I'm a long answer guy, so you always get a long podcast out of me. The thing that sets a good podcast apart from not a bad one, but maybe not one that's as tantalizing to the listener, is one that is well thought out, looks enjoyable for the host or the person creating it, and that the content is authentic to what they would like to achieve. So let's take a very good case in point. Kerry Atherton has a podcast called Stories of Hope.
I do.
Yeah. Someone might come at the podcast and say, oh, the intro is the same and the outro is the same every single time. Why don't you change it up? The intro is too long. It's like 20 seconds. It should be 10. 10 is the optimum number you should aim for. But when you reflect on it as the host and you take on that criticism, you say to yourself, well, I mean, the intro is kind of important. That's like the gateway to the show. For my show, it's the recognition that people know where they are when they listen. And maybe they hear an excellent voice telling them what to expect from Stories of Hope. Then they get straight into a conversation with someone that I know is going to ask the right questions about what I would like to know about adversity, about addiction, about trauma. And that's what they come for. Yeah. And that's why I think Stories of Hope works incredibly well. And I would call it a successful show because the mission, the goals, it's tied to what your mission is. We're not doing millions of downloads every month, but that's okay because it's the comments, it's the feedback, it's that you want to keep coming back and doing episodes of the show. All of that together, I think, makes a good podcast.
Oh, thank you, Matt. That's great feedback. And something that I was thinking when you were talking about that too is something that I'm not great at, the social media side. looking at the analytics and everything like that. So for people that are listening that aren't clued, like I'm a connector, and that's obviously why I do the podcast, but I'm not gifted in all the other areas to actually maybe spread the podcast further. So what would you say to other people like me that want to do a podcast, but they lack those other skills to be able to really get it out there and get more listeners?
I would say that you need to prioritize your actions and
Okay.
figure out what percentage those actions contribute to the overall success of the podcast and the enjoyment for you at the end of the day. Now, this is not going to be an objective measure. I'm just going to throw some numbers around. But
Yeah.
let's say you're creating a podcast. The podcast should probably be like 60 to 70% of where the overall effort goes, right?
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is have a great newsletter, a great social reel set up on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and all that. But then for them to get to the podcast and discover that it's actually way too short, it doesn't talk about what the social reels indicated, and the quality really isn't anything to write home about.
Mm-hmm.
So the podcast itself should always be the focus.
Right. Yeah.
After the podcast being the focus, make sure that you iterate and continue to improve the podcast itself, because it's super easy once you start thinking about all this stuff that I'm about to talk about in that last 30%. It's easy for that to occupy so much of your time that you lose sight of what the podcast is doing. Generally, that's when podcasters start to feel the burnout stages. Now, people talk about podfade, the term podfade. I actually don't like that term anymore.
And can you explain what that is? Because I haven't actually heard that term.
Oh, great. In that case, everybody forget what I'm about to tell you about this word podfade. So this is a term that the podcasting industry likes to talk about because statistically, what people will do is grab data from the RSS feeds, from the analytics of shows. They will have a look at how many shows released an episode most recently and when they released it and how many episodes they did. And generally, the podfade measure is by how fast someone left their podcast and what they call fail or gave up.
Right.
The thresholds by which someone can consider themselves successful by avoiding podfade. So podfade is when you disappear, when you just end the podcast for no apparent reason and the audience is left hanging, no idea. But the truth is you're burnt out.
Yeah.
Like you had a look at the next episode trying to tackle it and you went, you know what? This isn't for me anymore. I don't want to do this. I hate this. I don't like it. I don't like myself. I don't like my subject matter. This sucks. You know, it could be any number of things. Any conversation of burnout would be very similar, I think.
And can I jump in right there and ask you, do you have a rough statistic of how many people that start a podcast go through podfade after the first year?
Well, it's not usually a yearly measure. They tend to measure it by episodes. So generally the number thrown around these days is that podfade usually hits before someone reaches 7 episodes.
7? Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think 21 means that you're doing better than 50% of other podcasters. And then there's another number on top of that that tells you how you're doing in 10% and then 1%. And sometimes people skew those numbers a little bit. Instead of downloads, they talk about, I don't even know, other things. I've stopped looking at the data because realistically, and look, this is my opinion, but it'll help you frame your thinking a little bit if you start to look at the data like this. It's very easy for something like this to be toxically positive. And when I say toxically positive, it means it's telling you something about a scenario that you want to avoid. You want to avoid podfade, but it's telling you you must do 7 episodes so that you didn't get to podfade. And then it says, okay, you did 7 episodes. Next threshold is going to be 21. 21 episodes. And not only will you not be podfading, you will also be better than 50% of podcasters. Okay, great. I got to 21 episodes. Now they're like, good. Okay, now it's 100. 100 episodes and you can get to the top 10% of podcasters. Oh, I'd love to be the top 10%. Let's get to 100. Then you get to 100 and it's like, oh, it's 221. 221 episodes. You're better than top 1% of podcasters. And then you get there and you're like, okay, I never Podfaded. And then you've got bags under your eyes, crow's feet, your fingers hurt, your downloads haven't gone up, you haven't focused on growth, you've just focused on putting the episodes out there.
Yeah.
Just to avoid Podfade. And what's happened? It's made it a worse experience for you at the end of the day. Now, this is obviously a hyperbolic scenario. Like, not everybody goes through this. But that's what I see about stats like what they're trying to push with Podfade. Of course, we don't want people to stop podcasting because any companies talking about it, and I won't name them here just in case because a lot of them are quite reputable, but they just do the wrong things with the data.
Yeah, right.
They are motivated for people to continue podcasting, so they'll pay for their products. But what I want people to walk away from with the Podfade conversation is to go, well, I mean, externally, people can tell me what I should be doing, but I know what I need to do once I know what my mission is, what I'm trying to say with the podcast, and that I'm willing to come to the table with that 70% allocation of time to continuously improve, learn more, and be open to adapting what I do for my show. I told you I'm a long answer guy. That had a lot in it.
That's a great answer, Matt.
But the actual question you asked was, what about the social media and all that extra stuff?
Oh, yeah.
So there was like a ton of value in there. And maybe the amount of time I spent on that should be representative of that 70% for the podcast. That's where your attention should go.
Yeah, and it's like, really, isn't it, people asking themselves when they do set out to do a podcast, not only what is my goal, but because it can become a never-ending, measure or push or, the demonstration of what is success type thing. It's all about perception. And it looks different for everyone, doesn't it? And with my stories of hope, when I even set out with my first live event, which I honestly thought maybe only 5 people will turn up, I thought, well, if that happens, I will share my vision with those 5 people. And 30 people walked in the room that night. And then the venue that I was at, I told them I was so excited, and I said, they said, how did you go? And I said, the venue, we actually packed it out. We couldn't fit any more people in. And so they said, well, that's okay. We've built a brand new function room downstairs. We'll put you in there from now on. That seats 150 people. And so on the year anniversary of the first Stories of Hope event, I packed that room out with 150 people. And we heard the story of a local chef, Matt Galinsky. He came and shared, and he actually lost his entire family in a fire on Christmas night and suffered severe burns to a lot of his body. And he had been through, some of the worst trauma that anybody could ever imagine. And he had been doing a cooking demonstration at a women's conference when I was right in the middle of my rock bottom. And I had the light bulb moment that if I can't find the person that can help me out the other side, I will become that person for others. It was so significant and so special to have him speaking at that live event. But I had set long before that a mantra for myself that it's all about the ones. Even if only one person turns up at the event and their life is changed by listening to the 2 speakers, then my event's worth it. And so I've literally gone into my podcast with that same mindset.
Yeah.
If one person that was going to suicide listens to my podcast and decides not to do it and decides to reach out for hope, well, then that whole episode's been worth it.
Absolutely. And the troublesome thing is that you may not hear from them.
That's right. I probably
you have saved that life. Yeah. They might just be a number in our podcast hosts analytics telling us that someone listened.
Yeah.
As you hear this story, what Kerry's discussing might be resonating strongly with you. Perhaps you've experienced something similar yourself and are looking for support. Kerry Atherton is an experienced counsellor and wellbeing coach and has private sessions available if you or someone you know needs some help. You don't have to deal with trauma, addiction, PTSD, and abuse alone. If you'd like to talk about today's episode or your own experiences, book a session with Kerry at empowerlifesolutions.com.au or check the link in the show notes and embrace a future filled with hope. Now back to the episode. The key thing that people should note is the way you described that, it was about who turned up. It wasn't about how many people grabbed your, flyer that went out on power polls, and it wasn't how many people told other people who told other people about it. It was about who came. And for you, it was about changing the lives of anyone who would come.
That's right.
That's the danger of that 30% with the social media, I think. And look, I'm going to sound like the curmudgeon here because I have a very specific opinion about the value of social media, and Australians listening will maybe share it or not with the under 16s ban that came about at the end of last year with specific social media stuff.
That's right.
But for podcasts, it's very easy to get caught up in creating social reels, getting views, getting all of the platforms covered, making sure it's everywhere. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do that. But a lot of data that's out there is indicating that the shorts and reels as promotion doesn't really generate as much podcast listenership as you think it does.
Okay.
It kind of covers up a little bit of that with, this reel did really well. 1,200 people watched it. That's impact, that's impact for my show.
Yeah.
But realistically, algorithmically, something was pushed at some point to make it in front of enough people that it was recommended. But what we really want to know for a podcast is how many people watch that reel and then went to listen to the show.
Yeah, true.
And generally, the number there will be under 5% conversion, if anything at all. A lot of people are disappointed by it. But again, I'm going to sound conspiratorial here, but the big tech companies or the people who would like to sell services will tell you, if you're not on YouTube, you're wasting your time because you're leaving 75% of your audience on the table just by not being there. And then when you get there, they email you again and say, hey, we noticed your podcast is on YouTube, but your titles and thumbnails aren't optimized for attention and algorithmic driving push, blah, 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 blah. It's super easy for people.
I'm getting these hundreds of these emails every day in my spam, and it does hit nerve with you. It's like, what am I doing wrong or what am I not doing right? So I'm glad you keep talking about this, Matt. We need to hear this.
Absolutely. And part of the reason is the burnout we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
If some of this, let's say social media should occupy 10% of your extra time in that 30% we talked about. If you keep getting told of what you should be doing on a bunch of different places all the time, otherwise your show is going to fail. Of course, reactively we go, oh, well, I must put my reels on YouTube. I must put them on Instagram, TikTok. I must make posts on Blue Sky, on Twitter, Facebook, anything else you can think of that exists that I may not be aware of just because I'm not in that game so much. It becomes a lot of work at the end of it. And then you're like, well, I can't be bothered doing this. Do I have a budget to hire someone? Well, whatever. Or how do I automate this? Buffer.com or any of those websites that will just automatically post for you everywhere. It's just, it's a lot of breadth of scope and focus for something that really doesn't have a massive impact on the show itself.
Right. Yeah. That's
now,
yeah.
The main reason I talk about it in this way is because I don't want to see a great podcast go down because someone got burnt out because they focused on doing social media.
Yeah, good.
But in saying that, there is a way to approach the social media aspect in and of itself as a separate activity to the podcast if you have a mission. So let's say you, Kerry, instead of doing what we usually do, where we grab a few really choice clips from episodes and share them as a way to indicate that the episodes have released, instead you had, 10 or 15 main takeaways that you had from conversations on the podcast, and you created specific social reels instead of clips from the episode, like actual reels that you focus the attention on.
Yeah.
And then talked about the podcast at the end, that it exists and you can go listen to it. That's a different kind of activity. That's a social media activity. It's not a podcast activity.
Yeah.
And then treating them separately, the value add for you or the measure of success is different. You have a social media goal and you have a podcast goal instead of having a podcast goal that gets fed by a social media or newsletter or whatever.
Yeah, that's so true.
And look, I would speak for hours on what has largely been considered the dangers of social media at this stage, but we cannot untangle ourselves as humans from it.
Yeah.
It's just, we cannot do it. I even ran a little experiment on myself with, I wouldn't call it an addiction, but our ability to want to release our attention to something with the intermittent schedule reward systems that Reels and YouTube Shorts do is so compelling that even myself, who is in that system, scrolling, like I'll spend some time scrolling through Reels that I enjoy, I still feel compelled to stay. It's just, it's a biological imperative. And they've been built that way to absorb our attention. So
almost set up like poker machines.
That's it. That's it. Actually, poker machines probably learn from social media too, right? Like that's how they build them.
To appeal straight to our, systems with a massive hit of dopamine, and bang, we're right there, and we just want to keep that fed.
Yeah. So to not talk about it too much, but just to say to anyone interested in researching this stuff a little bit more, The Social Dilemma I'm pretty sure it's still on Netflix. Very good for the social media side. And from the Center for Humane Technology, Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin, they do a video on YouTube called The AI Dilemma, which talks about the future of AI in the context of social media, and Jonathan Haidt's book on the anxious generation. Those three together will give you everything you need to create what is hopefully a similar opinion about social media for me. But anyway.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll be sure to check them out because I've watched The Social Dilemma, and I think the other two sound fantastic. Matt, something changing the shift here too, now that I was thinking about, was we can't help as humans if we watch a television show or we listen to something that we know could be, on the edge. We can't help, when we're watching a TV show that we think is going in a great direction, and then something horrific happens on the television show, or we're exposed to something that we didn't want to see. You can't unsee that. You can't unhear what you hear. How do you cope? Because nurses, doctors, people on the front line, us as counsellors, like we have supervisors that we go to and we debrief with if we've been exposed to any trauma through what we've heard or listened to. As a podcast guy, you often won't get warning about what you're going to watch. And I'm only thinking about this now as I'm asking you this question, because I've sent you some pretty on the edge stuff and I don't give you any warning. And I'm just like, here, Matt, here's the next episode. And because I'm a counsellor and I've heard so much of this stuff and I'm not easily shocked, it doesn't mean to say that some of those things that you watch and hear on the episodes that you're sent from different people, not only me, that are podcasters, doesn't affect you and your own mental health. I'm sure there's times when you do hear stuff and it really tugs at your heartstrings, but how do you cope? What do you do with that once you've heard all that stuff and been exposed to that without any warning?
Well, look, the true answer is, I guess, would be practice. Like, as you said, I've edited for other podcasts that have similar content to yours.
Yeah.
And getting exposed to it a lot will give you the means to compartmentalize as you need to be able to deal with it. I think I might be, after talking with a few editors that have done content similar and that actually choose the clients they take on and the podcasts they edit for this reason.
Okay.
I think I may just have a predisposition to compartmentalizing the approach to it.
Yeah.
It's not something I think about a lot, actually, which is probably a benefit to me, right?
Like, absolutely.
Like if we're doing 3 episodes of your show back to back, and I get one on suicide, one on drug addiction, and one on someone who's negotiated being in prison, I don't have to decompress from those conversations.
Yeah, right.
But the advantage of practice being that I edited for who was previously attached to this podcast, Kintsugi Heroes, I think I did well north of like 100 and 150 episodes for them over the course of my time with them. That was a true like spread of topics because they talked to everybody under the sun for the main show. And then they did flood disasters, they did fire disasters. And some of the things you hear in those stories, they hit you in the right spot. And talking about TV shows, I think, is the right way to talk about that too. Because a phenomenon that I've experienced myself, being quite a stoic person, like
Yeah.
it usually takes a lot to make me cry at a movie. But you feel the emotional resonance points that are created in a TV show. I think it's the same for conversations with these kinds of people. There was one after the flood disasters episodes that I recorded for Kintsugi Heroes, and I was listening to this guy talk. There was one moment where I think it was about an hour and a half long conversation, where he was talking about how he wasn't doing so great. He knew he wasn't. He was living in a tent trying to clean out his house that had been flooded. He was renting it, but it was the only place that they lived. And so every day he was spending 12 to 14 hours plus his job just trying to recover everything in this house that had been flooded like 6-7 foot deep. His wife and kid and dog were living somewhere further away. He was all on his own for like several months, I think.
Wow.
And he sat down on the stoop of a community center in the town nearby. He described himself talking to a mate. The way he described that, he was like full regular mode, just talking as a podcaster. But that was one of those moments that hit me, and I just started tearing up as I was editing it.
Oh.
And that doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah.
But I guess that was one of the moments where I've broken, where a male, Aussie battler kind of thing, stoic face, talking much like myself, fairly monotone, fairly dry, just explaining how it is, explains how it was in that moment. And that was the thing that ticked over.
Wow.
I think I compartmentalize it well. And on that note, I don't think there's advice I'd give to people who are dealing with similar situations, except to say that you should talk about it. And that if you're a podcast host looking for an editor for similar material, to, I guess, make sure you prepare them. I don't know. It's a specific journey for people to walk, because I specifically don't want to tell you on this episode, Kerry, that you did the wrong thing by not telling me what the contents of every episode was, because I don't think you needed to do that.
No,
and I probably would have asked you if we did.
Yeah, and I guess because we've worked before on the previous podcast, I kind of knew your demeanor. I knew what you were exposed to with a lot of those stories as well.
That's it. Yeah.
But it was something that just did cross my mind, as we were talking before about, wow, yeah, I don't actually say to Matt, hey, here's the nuts and bolts of this episode. It's just like, have a listen, and and it is something, though, for people listening that some people might need to take into consideration.
Yeah. But what's excellent is that when the conversations about these things are done well, the editor is just like someone beside the conversation taking notes. We're not, I'm not here building a full 60 minutes episode with B-roll and cuts and trying to assemble the conversation from the questions you've asked. We have a conversation from front to back that you have expertly guided with what you both want to know, and coming to the table to the guest with your understanding and experience as someone who deals with trauma on a regular basis, both maybe yourself and for other people. When you have someone like that as a bit of a shepherd to guide the flow of the conversation through, as the editor, we don't really need to think about, well, should we move the part where they lost their child to before or after they had an immense drug addiction that led to a trauma? Mm-hmm. I think if we were making decisions like that, that would probably have a greater effect. Yeah. But with a host like yourself, it makes it easy to just observe and refine the conversation to a point, knowing that it's going to get to the place it needs to get to without much input from us.
Yeah, and that's great, Matt. And that is always ticking over in my head as I am interviewing. Will this be something Matt will need to be editing, or maybe we shouldn't go there? So yeah, I am mindful of that as we go along in our interviews. So Matt, as we kind of are coming towards the end of our time together, Was there a question that you wanted to ask me specifically?
Well, funnily enough, I think I've kind of threaded it through quite expertly as a podcast host myself, through your responses and then following up questions. Because I think that the thing that I would really want to talk to you about as a guest on a show, talking about how you do your podcast, is truly how unique it is in a sea of podcasts that are trying to do something similar. And it's not maybe as clear to the listener as it would be to someone like yourself or me who gets to interact with the content before it gets out there to the rest of the world. The unique approach, conversation, subject matter, the mission that you have, the goals that you have, all of those are just, they're spot on at the end of it. And that's not a question, that's a statement.
That means a lot, actually. It means a lot because, it doesn't matter how many people I interview, or at the end of the day, when you're working on your own, you always sit there and there always comes to visit an element of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really encouraging to get that positive feedback, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. So, well, because I'm the editor and we're talking behind the scenes here, maybe a good question for you would be, how different do the conversations feel after they've come from me back out again? You are in there, you're asking them the questions, you have an idea of the flow, what should be included, all of that stuff. Do you ever find that the podcast's episodes come back to you from me and you go, oh, we probably should have kept that bit, or anything like that changes the message or the goal? I guess, would you recommend seeking out an editor if someone's listening now and would like to ease some of the burden? I don't know. I think I'm trying to drive at a question about how you approach it specifically for your show and what people can
and no, there's never been a time where it's come back and I've thought, oh, that didn't hit the mark. I guess I'm a person that does a lot of homework and investigation about somebody before I will engage with them for a service, and also people that I let close to me in general. And I'm a really good investigator like that. And I guess I think I just have so much confidence and faith in your ability as a podcast producer that I almost know instinctively that if I stuff up or something isn't right, or somebody says something, or somebody has to go to the door because there's a delivery guy that's come or anything like that, I just kind of know that you just get it and that you will just sort that out. And every single time, you just know exactly what to take out and what should stay in, And so it's like I feel like I just trust you so much that I don't even have to give that a worry. And that's a real load off as the person who has the podcast, to know that I have a podcast producer like that. So I've found gold with you.
So would you say then that someone seeking someone else to produce or edit, or in whatever capacity, their podcast?
To Matthew Bliss. If everyone's listening, Matthew Bliss. Podcast producers. Matthew Bliss Podcast Productions.
Look, they can. I will be honest. My time is not infinite.
Capacity, Matt.
Yeah. No, I'm fairly run down at the moment, but
we don't want you to get burned out. Okay.
That's it. But would you suggest that people, instead of looking for someone who edits podcasts and throwing them an episode every week on Fiverr or Upwork for $50, instead look for someone who is in it for the long term and will spend that time? I think I'm loading the question here, but will spend that time getting to know you and your proclivities and your preferences, trying to create an episode that you look at and don't have 12,000 notes at the end of every one?
Oh, I think that's 100% just so important, because a podcast is such a personal reflection of ourselves. And so to have somebody who actually understands you and gets you is just so key, I think, to the success of the podcast. It's one thing to be, a podcast host and to do a great job at being a podcast host, to have a good relationship with your podcast guests. But if you've got somebody who's producing that podcast that doesn't get you at all, and doesn't get your mission and your vision, then the whole thing could go to dust. And that's definitely not the case for me. So it's so important to find somebody that, I think the number one thing really is that resonates with your values.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that your values really resonate with mine. And I think that that is the most important ingredient for a producer and a host to have together to produce something that's going to be quality and something so meaningful that will go out to touch the lives of anyone who listens.
It's about the message, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And if they don't agree or understand the message, you never know what you're going to get.
That's right. And on that note, my last question for you, Matt, is what's your message for the world? It's my favourite question that I ask everyone.
And I edit every episode and I hear, and I didn't tell you about this question and you didn't know it was coming, but the great answers come from it. And I was like, oh God, as soon as you were about to say it, I was like, I forgot it's coming. Look, a podcasting message for people who are thinking about starting a podcast, don't be afraid of the work. But if you are currently a podcaster and feel overwhelmed, go back to the message, go back to the mission, bring it inwards and stop looking outwards for guidance and instead trust yourself and that you can build what your audience wants.
Great message, Matt. And thank you so much for everything that you have and continue to do for me and my podcast and my listeners.
No problem at all. Just keep making great content and we'll be along for the ride.
Together is better. Don't do life alone, as we say at Stories of Hope. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to Stories of Hope with Kerry Atherton. If this conversation helped you, please consider sharing the podcast with a friend or leaving a rating and review on your podcast player. If you'd like to find out more about Kerry Atherton, head to storiesofhope.com.au where you can purchase her books or find her next event. Check the show notes for links and information about our guest in this episode. And remember, you don't have to walk your path alone.